from language to the stuff that our next speaker will talk about. His name is Klaus Schmeh. He's a computer scientist and a member of the German Skeptics. He's a cryptologist professionally. I'm sure you're all familiar more or less with what cryptology is. Some of you might have read Simon Singh's book. Of course, you've all seen The Imitation Game. But I'm very happy that we have here a very professional cryptologist who knows really in depth all about it. And he'll be talking about parascientific ghosts.
Thank you, Johan, and welcome to my presentation. Well, there's one thing I forgot to tell you. One of my main fields of interest is the history of cryptology, so this topic is quite related to this history of cryptology. Let me start with a book that was published in the year 1874. It was written by a man named Charles Percy Smith, and in this book a couple of very interesting theories are given. For example, Charles Percy Smith claimed that if you take the height of the Great Pyramid in Giza in Egypt and multiply it with 10 to the power of 9, you get the distance between the Earth and the Sun. If you take the lengths of all the pyramid diagonals and add them, you get 25,827, and that's notable for two reasons. First, it's exactly the period length of a precessional cycle of the Earth, if you take the length in inches. And second, it's notable because it proves that the old Egyptians already knew the inch as a length unit. And if you take the volume of the sarcophagus and divide it by 250 multiplied with the weight of the water that fits in it, quite nice construction, you get 5,672, which is the mean density of the Earth. But that's not all, there's more. If you look at a certain gallery inside the Great Pyramid, you will find that this gallery has marks for all the important events in the history of mankind. You have to start in the year 4004 before Christ. This is, as we all know, the year when the Earth was created. Then there's another mark in the year 2743 before Christ. This is when the Great Flood took place, as we all know. Then the next event is Exodus in the year 1453 before Christ. And then, of course, the birth of Christ is marked in the Great Pyramid. And, well, there are other marks, but the final one is the second coming of Christ. In this case, Charles Percy Smith obviously was not really sure, so he thought that the mark might be somewhere between 1882 and 1911. Well, the last one is not correct, as we all know, but the other ones, at least for the people of the time, sounded quite plausible. Well, what's the conclusion? The conclusion is the Great Pyramid is, of course, not only a grave, it's some kind of a book made out of stone, and it preserves the knowledge of the old Egyptians for future civilizations. Well, that's from the 19th century, which was taken serious by many contemporaries. Well, now I have, before I proceed, I have to give a few important definitions. Steganography. So, steganography is a little similar as cryptology or encryption technology, but it's not the same. Steganography is defined as information hiding or the hidden coding of information in any object. It can be a building like a pyramid, but it can also be a text or whatever. I will give you a few examples. And, well, this is one example. This is a letter written by a prisoner of war in the Second World War. It reads just like an ordinary harmless message, but if you only take the two first words of each line, you get a second message, a secret one. And this is after surrender, 50% Americans lost in Philippines, in Nippon 30%. That's a message for the American military back home. Quite interesting, I think. Well, this is another example of steganography. It's also a secret message that is hidden on a gravestone. This is the so-called cover message. So this is what you read, or what you get if you read just the text which is there, and the secret message is easy to see. Also an example of steganography. Now let's look at this. This is a picture from the 17th century. It looks like an apple tree, and in fact it's an apple tree, but in this case it's only the cover because there's a secret message hidden in it. Now you can see this if you put a letter line on top of it, and if you divide the picture into columns like this, and if you look at the upmost or the topmost apple, it's in the I column. So I started with an I. I hope you can see that the yellow letter is an I. The next apple is in the N column. Then you get an N, and the next letter is in the D column, and so on. And if you proceed like this with the whole tree, you get this Latin sentence, which is the hidden message. It's steganographically hidden in this picture, which is only a cover for the actual message. And well, when I looked at the material I received here at the conference yesterday, I realized that even the organizers of this conference work with steganography, because if you look at this notepad and if you look at the paper, it looks like ordinary lined paper, but in fact it contains hidden messages. It's also kind of steganography. Okay, so steganography is the hidden coding of information, and that's also a term which was invented by myself, and I'm probably the only skeptical cryptologist, and so nobody has ever, or not many people have dealt with this topic in general. So I invented the word parasteganography or paracode, which is defined as hidden message or hidden messages that do not exist according to mainstream scientists. And of course, these messages coded in the Great Pyramid in Egypt are of course an example of parasteganography. And now there's an interesting question. How can one prove that a certain paracode does not exist, or that it's not a real code, not deliberately coded? This is of course difficult because, as we all know as skeptics, it's always difficult to prove the non-existence of a phenomenon. In this case, there's a nice tool which I call an absurd comparison code, and this is a tool that can be used to disprove the existence of a code. The method is simply to prove that there's not only a code in an object like a pyramid, but also in some pretty ridiculous or absurd object, something nobody believes that there's a code hidden in it. For example, in a bicycle. There's actually a very interesting absurd comparison code developed by a Dutch physicist named Cornelis de Jager. He said, well, for the Egyptians, the Great Pyramid is kind of the national symbol. For us people in the Netherlands, the bicycle is something like a national symbol, and if there's a code hidden in the pyramid, there must also be a code hidden in my bicycle. And he proved that this code exists. For example, if you take the pedal radius squared, multiplied with the square root of the lamp radius, multiplied with the square root of the bell radius, you get exactly the right ratio of code. Must be a real code. Or if you take this formula here, you get the fine structure constant for modern physicists. So, as it seems, the national symbol of the Dutch, the bicycle, contains a hidden code, or at least the bicycle of Cornelius the Jager. There's a similar code developed by two German scientists, Warmhold and Lubben, the Fakisten pasta spoon code. This is, or it looks like a pasta spoon. In reality, it's of course an object that was made to preserve the knowledge of mankind for future. If you take the prong height and multiply it with the handle circumference and divide it by the handle length, you get the number pi. If you take this formula, you get the number e. And if you take this formula, you get the speed of light. And if you take this formula, you get the length of the Eurotunnel. Okay, it should be clear why this is an absurd comparison code. And now the question is, how does one get such a code? And it's not too difficult. You just have to take this generic formula. The letters A, B, C, D, and E are values like the pedal weight, the lamp radius, or whatsoever. Or in the case of the pasta spoon, it's the prong length or something like that. The letters F, G, H, I, and J can be substituted with small numbers, positive and negative, and like 1/2 and things like that. And finally, as a constant, you can take just everything from physics or mathematics or the length of the Eurotunnel or whatever you want to take. And it should be clear that you have, in this case, tens of millions of combinations, and of course, some of them will work. And this is how the pasta spoon code and the bicycle code is constructed, and the pyramid code works pretty much the same way. To summarize it, the pyramid code is a paracode, and it is disproved by the bicycle code and the pasta spoon code, which are absurd comparison codes. Okay, so let's now look at another quite famous parascientific code. We are here in England, so most of you will be familiar with the Shakespeare-Bacon debate. The code is only a part of this debate. The basic question is, who wrote Shakespeare's plays? Well, most people think they were written by William Shakespeare. But, well, not much is known about the life of William Shakespeare, and especially not about his education, and some people think that his education simply was not good enough to write such marvelous plays. And so people have searched for other persons or for contemporaries who might be the real Shakespeare authors, and one of the most prominent candidates is Francis Bacon, the philosopher. Who wrote Shakespeare's plays, Shakespeare or Francis Bacon? Well, in the 19th century, I think around 1880 or so, this man named Ignatius Donnelly said that he had found a solution. He had found a proof, allegedly, that the Shakespeare plays were written by Francis Bacon, and the proof was based on steganography, because he said that there's a code hidden in Shakespeare's plays, and this code was inserted by Francis Bacon, and the code says that Bacon is the real author. This is how the code works. First of all, you have to take a root number, so you have a set of root numbers, so you can take any of them. Then you have to subtract a modifier number, you also have a set of them. Then you have to subtract the number of words written on a Shakespeare page. And then, if you want, you don't have to, but if you want, you can subtract the number of hyphenated words and words in brackets. And the number you get is interpreted as a page number and the position of a word on this page. And if you repeat this process, you get several words which form a sentence, and this sentence is the secret message. For example, the first message or one message he found is, Shakespeare never wrote a word of them, which probably means Shakespeare never wrote a word of them. It is even thought here that your cousin of St. Alban, which is Bacon, writes them. This is the proof, or a part of the proof, that Shakespeare's works were written by Bacon. Well, pretty soon after this book was published, an absurd comparison code was published by a man named Joseph Chirpin Pyle. And with the same method, he found the following message in a work of Shakespeare: Don Nilhi, which is Donnelly, the author, politician, and mountebank, will work out the secret of this play. So if this is true, Francis Bacon not only coded his own name into the Shakespeare play, but also the name of the person who a few centuries later would solve this mystery, which is certainly absurd, and this is considered a proof that the whole thing doesn't make much sense. But there are other Shakespeare-Bacon codes as well. For example, Walter Conrad Arensberg found these 4 lines in Hamlet, and if you take the starting letters or the first 2 letters of some lines, and if you change the order, F. Bacon. Well, in some cases you have to take the first 2 letters, in some cases only 1, and you have to change the order, and you don't get the complete first name, but only part of it, but, well, better than nothing. And this is a really interesting Shakespeare-Bacon code, completely different one, discovered by Orville Owen, and I have to admit that I have never read it, and I think I will never read it because the whole code description fills a piece of paper which is about 30 meters long and about 1 meter wide. You can see it on this picture here. And it was never accepted by mainstream science, probably because nobody has ever read it. So. In 1957, these 2 cryptographers, William Friedman and Elizabeth Friedman, they are among the most notable crypto specialists or code breakers in history. They published a book named The Shakespearean Cipher Examined, and in this book they looked at all the Shakespeare-Bacon codes they were aware of, and the result was they rebutted all of them. And since this book, I think that no serious scientist has ever has ever accepted Shakespeare-Bacon code theory anymore. It's considered a complete pseudoscience, and it's probably not really worth to read all these code theories that were published. Let's look at a few more paracodes. For example, the Voynich manuscript. That's an encrypted book from the Middle Ages, 15th century probably, and it's encrypted, or at least written in a way that nobody can read. It's one of the, or it's probably the most important mystery of crypto history. And as I said, we read, maybe it's because the real message was not written in the letters, but was maybe the main message is steganographic in nature. You can see here, you can see the code that is hidden here, or if you can see it, maybe you can see it if the letter is magnified. Well, the claim is that these letters, if you look at them closely, contain marks, and that these marks code a message, and the content of this message is that Roger Bacon, which was a famous Middle Ages scientist and monk, that he was the author of the manuscript. This is Roger Bacon, lived in the 13th century. But the problem is that it's very hard to find these marks, or I have never found them. They are probably non-existent. It's just a stupid theory trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense so far. So this has never been accepted by Voynich manuscript scholars. You certainly know the Da Vinci Code. Well, the Da Vinci Code is not really a steganographic code. It's more something like, or more a matter of symbols. For example, if you look at the Apostle John, you will see that he looks like a woman. So some people say this is not the Apostle John, it's Mary Magdalene. And there's also a triangle between Mary Magdalene and Jesus, and this is a symbol allegedly for the mother's lap. And I'm sure all of you have seen that the chalice is missing on this table, and of course this is another symbol for I don't know what, but all these symbols, if you take them together, they prove that Leonardo, the painter of the picture, knew that Mary Magdalene was the Holy Grail and the bearer of Jesus' blood. Well, this is not a steganographic code, and it's considered pseudo-scientific anyway, so don't ask me about the Da Vinci Code, it's not my business, but I don't think that it's really valid. But there are real steganographic or pseudo-steganographic codes in the Nazca lines in Peru, South America. Several of them have been detected. Some people say that these lines are, that they code messages for extraterrestrial intelligences, so if somebody sees the Earth from space, he will see these lines and he will recognize a certain code in them and know, learn things about mankind. I don't think that this is really valid. Most skeptics know the Shroud of Turin. Of course, also codes have been found in the Shroud of Turin. If you look at these structures, it's pretty easy to find something that looks like a letter, and if you search long enough, you will even find sequences of letters and words like Jesus or Jesus Christus or whatever this means. I don't think that this ever has been accepted by Shroud experts, and if it was accepted, these messages don't mean anything. In the compositions of Johann Sebastian Bach, at least one code has been found. Allegedly, Bach coded his own death year in one of his compositions, so obviously he was not only a composer but also a fortune teller or clairvoyant. And I will later talk about the Bible code. Soon after the Bible code was published, somebody also published a Quran code. And well, both books are pretty stupid in my view, but this one has more tasteless pictures, so it's at least a little more worth reading. And in the works of Nostradamus, codes have also been detected. Of course, it's pretty difficult to understand these poems of Nostradamus, but if you know the code, you will understand the real meaning. The problem is that several different codes have been detected, and so it's not really sure which one is really valid. Maybe we'll learn that in the future. And Mona Lisa also contains a code. You simply have to look in her eyes, and you will find numbers written in her eyes, pretty small ones, of course. And well, honestly, I don't know exactly what the code says, but it has never been accepted by art historians. You probably know the faces on Mars. The area on Mars where this face was found has a few other interesting structures, and if you draw lines between these objects, you get also a kind of code. And some people say that this code was made for other civilizations in space, and these are messages telling secrets about the people or about the civilizations who built these structures here. Again, this has never been accepted. This is a little different. This is an advertisement that was published in 1941 in a US newspaper. It looks like an ordinary board game or dice game advertisement, but look at these numbers. Here's a 12, here's a 7, and this was in the year 1941. And if you take this as the date, December 12, 1941, does everybody know what happened on this day? Pearl Harbor attacks, yes. But this advertisement was published about 2 weeks before the Pearl Harbor attack. So, yeah. Okay. So, some say it's a Pearl Harbor prediction. There are other paracodes, for example, in the works of the German author Rimmelshausen, in Goethe's Travels, in the Rohonk Codex, the famous book in Hungary, on Shakespeare's gravestone. There are dozens of them and a lot of nonsense that has been published. Now, one question is, why do paracodes exist? Well, basically, they are very typical pseudosciences. Usually, such a paracode is a poor appreciation of randomness, as Chris French said yesterday, and illusory correlations, that's one of the reasons. Selective perception, and the paracode always gives you the feeling that you know more than the others, and each paracode is also some kind of a conspiration theory, because only a few people know the truth and everybody else is clueless. And paracodes can be found easily everywhere. And sometimes even a paracode can be used to prove a pseudoscientific claim. So one pseudoscience helps the other one. Now let's come to the most famous paracode of all, the Bible code. So Simon Singh talked about it yesterday, so the ones who saw his presentation yesterday will probably know most of the things I say today. In 1997 there was a book published by journalist Michael Drosnin called The Bible Code. It sold more than 20 million copies, which is quite a lot. The code works like this. You just have to take the letters from the Old Testament, order them in a rectangle, and then search for meaningful letter sequences. And if you're lucky, you'll get words like President Kennedy to die and Dallas. So this is pretty obvious, a prediction of the Kennedy murder in 1963. And this was coded into the Bible 2,500 years ago, which is a miracle if it's true. And there's more. For example, the terror attack in Oklahoma, World War II, the Yitzhak Rabin murder, extinction of the dinosaurs. All this can be found in the Bible if you apply this code. But, well, as a cryptologist, or all cryptologists usually regard this as pseudoscience, because the reason should be clear. There are hundreds of thousands of letters in the Old Testament. There are thousands of ways to order them in a rectangle. There are thousands of words to search for. You get literally billions of combinations, and some of them will work. So it's not a miracle, it's just a matter of statistics. But no matter, to disprove this code, a number of absurd comparison codes have been published, like a Red Riding Hood code, or Moby Dick code, or code in the lyrics of the And in all of these works, codes have been found for everything that happened in the last 2,000 years, and for many things that didn't happen, and for things that will happen in the future or not happen. So, as I said, it's possible to find codes everywhere in every text saying everything. It's nothing real. Anyway, the first book was quite successful, so in 2002 the second Bible code book was published, and guess what Michael Drosnin had found in the meantime in the Bible in the year 2002? Of course he had found 9/11 predictions, but it's notable to say that he found them afterwards, not before. Here, Twin Towers knocked down twice airplane, a clear prediction of 9/11. And in 2010, it was published. But it's very interesting to look at the reviews at Amazon. The first Bible code book received 236 reviews, and that's a lot because in 1997 Amazon did not exist, so all these reviews were written later. The second book received 151, which is still a lot. And guess how many reviews were written for the third book? 2. So it's justified to say that the Bible code is dead. Nobody cares anymore. It's simply boring. It's the story of the past, and it's not worth to dedicate a lot of time for it. Okay, I'm almost at the end of my presentation. Now you might ask, is there also a real code? Has there ever been found a real message in a notable or a spectacular object? And the question is yes. The spectacular object is the crop circle. Well, as we all know, it was probably made by extraterrestrials, so it's very interesting to see what kind of message they send us. Well, first of all, the crop circle has 12 segments, and each segment contains these lines, and they are binary numbers. And the message that is hidden in this crop circle is written in the ESC code, which is known from computer science. And if you look at the 12 segments, you get a message like e to the power of I multiplied with pi plus 1 is 0. And that's a mathematical formula that is also known as Euler's identity. Well, so finally this crop circle proves, well, first of all, that extraterrestrials know Euler's identity. Second, they use the same letters for E, pi, and I. And third, they know the ESC code.
Thank you very much, Klaus, for an excellent talk. I think if you're in a gentle mood, and we are, of course, I think all your examples are some kind of a eulogy for the wonderful creativity of the human brain, isn't it? We have time for some questions. Yes.
Given that the Bible Code Part 3 only had 2 reviews, would you recommend that everyone here went and left their own reviews for it with heavily coded messages embedded within?
Well, very difficult question. It might be best to not buy this book and to not to write any reviews about it, because nobody cares, and why should we change this? But if you write a review, it might be a good idea to hide a message.